The unsettled isle, the ocean, had a way of forgiving no one. It took everything, from the sleekest yacht to the most weathered cargo ship, and chewed it down to splinters. For Elias, a man who had built his life on the promise of its vastness and unpredictability, that promise had finally delivered its fatal blow. One moment, he was in his bunk, a rhythmic sway lulling him into a restless sleep. The next, a violent, metallic shriek tore through the hole, followed by the deafening roar of water and the groans of stressed steel. The last memory was a kaleidoscope of chaos, blinding white foam, the sharp, coppery temps of diesel and salt, and the guttural, hopeless shouts of his crewmates. Elias had no clear recollection of fighting his way to the deck, of finding a loose life raft, or of being swallowed by the churning black maw of the storm. He simply woke up. He woke up on sand, the kind of coarse, beige grit that grated against his skin, smelling of crushed shells and something else, something rotten and sweet, like overripe fruit left to bake in the sun. The first thing he registered was a piercing silence, broken only by the gentle sigh of waves on the shore. He ached everywhere, a symphony of bruises and sprains. His head throbbed, and a sticky residue had caked in his hair and over his face. He spat a mouthful of sand, the taste of iron and defeat coating his tongue. The sun was a merciless blade, cutting through the thin canopy of trees that bordered the beach. He was on an island, a verdant, wild, and impossibly green expanse. The jungle rose from the sand like a monolithic wall, a tangle of ancient ferns and thick, knotted vines. He could hear the buzzing of unseen insects, a low hum that settled in the air and burrowed into his eardrums. He sat up, his body protesting with a series of sharp, white-hot pangs. The wreckage of his ship, the Andromeda, was a series of broken teeth on the horizon, a half-submerged skeleton of steel and splintered wood. It was a bleak monument to his failure, a cold tomb for his crew. The guilt was a physical weight in his stomach, a stone he knew would never dissolve. The island seemed untouched. The beach stretched for 100 meters in either direction before being swallowed by jagged rock formations. There were no footprints, no signs of human life, no signs of anything but the island's own chaotic flora. He stumbled to his feet, a wobbly puppet with 1,000 broken strings. His throat was a parched desert. His first priority was water. He followed the edge of the tree line, scanning for any sign of a stream or a spring. The jungle was suffocatingly humid, a green-on-green claustrophobia. Giant, leathery leaves dripped with moisture, but they were too high to reach. He tore off a piece of a thick, waxy-leafed plant and squeezed, but nothing came out. The jungle seemed to mock his thirst, its very abundance, a cruel joke. He walked for what felt like hours, his desperation growing with every unfulfilled step. The light began to dim, and the buzzing of insects took on a more insistent, predatory tone. Then, he saw it, a glint of metal, half buried in the undergrowth. A ship's compass. He knelt, his heart leaping with a desperate, foolish hope. The compass needle was frozen, pointing in a direction that meant nothing, but it was a sign that someone else had been here. He looked up, scanning the surrounding area. The glint had come from a small clearing, a strange, circular patch of ground where the jungle growth was stunted and brown. In the center of the clearing, half hidden by a large palm frond, stood a crude carving. It was a totem pole of sorts, but the figures were wrong, grotesque. They weren't animals or people. They were distorted, elongated shapes, with too many limbs and mouths that were gaping, silent screams. Elias felt a cold dread crawl up his spine, a feeling far more profound than the despair of being lost. The feeling intensified when he noticed what was at the base of the carving. Something was piled there, something that didn't belong to the jungle. It was a collection of personal effects, a rusting pocket watch, a broken pair of glasses, a handful of dull coins, and tucked in with them, half buried in the dirt, was a small, tattered leather-bound journal. The pages were warped and stained, but the script inside was still legible. He picked it up, his hands trembling. The first entry was dated 3 months prior. The handwriting was neat, confident. Day 1. Found fresh water and fruit. The island seems untouched. A paradise. Elias flipped the page. The entries grew more erratic, the handwriting becoming a frantic scrawl. Day 12. Saw something in the trees. It moved too fast to be an animal, a shadow, but with ... form. He turned another page. Day 30. The whispering has started. It sounds like my own thoughts, but with someone else's voice. It tells me things, horrible things. The journal fell from his hands. His thirst was forgotten, replaced by a cold, visceral terror. He scrambled to his feet, his mind screaming at him to run, to get away from this place. He looked back at the totem, at the contorted faces that seemed to stare at him with empty eyes. And that's when he heard it. Not a whisper, but a crunch. The sound of something heavy and deliberate moving through the undergrowth behind him. He spun around, his breath catching in his throat. The jungle was a solid, impenetrable wall of green. He stood frozen, his heart a panicked drum against his ribs. The sound came again, closer this time. A slow rhythmic drag of something against the wet leaves. It wasn't the clumsy step of a man. It was something else. Something large and dragging. Elias ran. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to get away. He plunged into the thickets, his fear overpowering the pain in his body. He stumbled, falling headlong into a small, muddy ravine. The sound of the drag stopped. He lay there, panting, the smell of damp earth and rot filling his nostrils. He waited, listening for the sound to continue. But there was only silence, a deep, profound, and unnatural silence. Even the buzzing of the insects had ceased. He slowly pushed himself up, his eyes scanning the forest above him. That's when he saw it, perched on a branch just above the ravine. It was a monkey, with thick black fur and intelligent, dark eyes. It was a strange creature, completely silent. It held something in its hand, something small and white. It was a human tooth. The monkey stared at him, its head cocked to the side. Then, slowly, it opened its mouth in a wide, unnatural grin. It didn't make a sound. It just smiled. A smile that stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of sharp, pearly, white teeth. Elias screamed. The sound was swallowed by the jungle's suffocating silence. He scrambled out of the ravine, fueled by a terror that was colder and sharper than any fear he had ever known. The silence was the worst part. The jungle was a thing of 1,000 noises, a chaotic symphony of buzzing, chirping, and rustling. Its complete cessation was a warning. It meant everything was listening. He ran blindly, the dense undergrowth tearing at his clothes and skin. He didn't stop until his lungs burned and his legs felt like lead. He burst through a curtain of hanging vines and found himself on a rocky outcropping overlooking a small, sheltered cove. He slid down the slope, his hands and feet finding purchase on the slick, moss-covered rocks. A small cave, a dark maw in the cliff face, offered itself as a refuge. He didn't hesitate. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of damp stone and something vaguely metallic. He slumped against the back wall, his body trembling uncontrollably. The faint light from the cove entrance was a cold comfort. He was safe, for now. He pulled his knees to his chest, trying to make himself small, insignificant. He didn't want to be found, not by the creature in the jungle, and not by whatever twisted being was inside that grinning monkey. The island seemed to breathe around him. The silence outside was just as thick here, the absence of sound a more powerful presence than any roar could ever be. It was in the silence that the whisper came. It wasn't a sound in the air, but a voice in his mind. It was his own voice, yet it was wrong. It was laced with a chilling, detached amusement. "You're not alone, Elias. We've been waiting." He clapped his hands over his ears, a futile gesture against a sound that was already inside his skull. The voice didn't get louder or softer. It just lingered, a thought that wasn't his own. He shook his head, a frantic, desperate attempt to dislodge the intrusive thought. He remembered the journal. The whispering has started. It sounds like my own thoughts, but with someone else's voice. It tells me things, horrible things. The words echoed in his head, confirming his terror. He curled into a fetal position, squeezing. His eyes shut. He tried to think of something else. His wife, her smile, the warmth of her hand in his. Anything to push back the encroaching madness. But the images were corrupted, distorted by the voice in his head. Her smile stretched into a wide, unnatural grin. Her hands were thin and bony, holding something small and white, a human tooth. He cried out, a strangled sob that was swallowed by the cavern. He was losing his mind. The island was doing it too. Him he had to get out. He had to get to the wreckage of the Andromeda. There had to be something there. A flare gun, a working radio, anything to signal for help. He waited until the last of the sunlight bled from the sky, painting the cove in a bruised shade of purple and orange. The jungle became a wall of impenetrable shadow. He crept from the cave, the moonlight casting long skeletal shadows across the sand. The air was heavy, humid, and still. Every rustle of a leaf, every creak of a branch, made him jump. He made his way back toward the beach, the path he had taken earlier, a phantom in the dark. He moved with a speed born of panic, his every sense on high alert. He could hear the ocean now, the gentle, hypnotic sound of the waves. It was the only sound that felt real, the only thing on this island that didn't feel like a lie. He reached the shoreline and saw it. The wreckage of the Andromeda was a black silhouette against the horizon, its broken form a testament to the storm. He saw no lights, no movement, just the hollow remains of his ship. He waded into the cold water, the current pulling at his legs. He would swim. He would get to the ship and find something, anything. As he got closer, a feeling of unease washed over him. The air grew colder, and a faint, acrid smell of decay filled his nostrils. He pulled himself onto a jagged piece of the hull, his hands bleeding from the sharp, rusted metal. He clambered onto a section of the main deck that had remained mostly intact. The scene was one of total destruction. The mast was gone. The bridge was a tangle of wires and shattered glass. He stepped into the main cabin, using the moonlight to navigate the debris. That's when he saw it. The source of the smell. Something was moving inside a pile of what looked like torn sails and broken wood. He froze, his hand instinctively going to the small pocket knife in his cargo pants. A figure emerged from the pile. It was a member of his crew, he realized with a gasp. It was James, the first mate. But it wasn't him. Not anymore. James's eyes were milky white and sightless. His skin was the color of a fish's belly, bloated and puckered from the water. And from his mouth, from his empty eye sockets, from every seam and tear in his skin, a swarm of small, black insects boiled out. They crawled over his face, his hands, burrowing into his flesh. They didn't seem to be a part of him, but rather a parasite that was wearing his body like a suit. James's mouth opened in a silent, unnatural yawn, and then the words came. Not from his vocal cords, but from the chittering of the insects within him. It was the whisper, the same voice Elias had heard in his head. "Welcome home, Captain. We've been waiting for you." The insect-riddled body took a step toward him, its movements jerky and disjointed. Elias stumbled back, his foot catching on a piece of wreckage. He fell, his head hitting the metal deck with a sickening thud. The world went black. He was trapped. The island was alive, and it wanted him. He woke to the taste of dirt and rot. In his mouth, the scent of mildew and damp stone filling his lungs. A cold, clammy surface pressed against his back. He was in a small, cramped space, no bigger than a coffin. The darkness was absolute, a suffocating weight that pressed in on him from all sides. He could feel the cold, slick walls of the space, rough with a strange, pebbled texture. Panic, hot and frantic, clawed at his throat. He tried to move, to stand, but his limbs were pinned. He was wrapped in something, a thick, fibrous cocoon that was both soft and strong. It felt like living matter. He struggled, his muscles straining against the bonds. The motion was met with a low, chittering sound from above him. He looked up, his eyes straining in the inky blackness. He could see nothing, but he could feel the presence. It was in the air, a cool, dry breath that smelled of loam and dead things. He could hear it moving, a sound like 1,000 tiny needles scraping against each other. The voice was in his head again. It was the same whisper, but clearer now, more confident. Don't fight. You'll only tear the host. We need you whole. The word host sent a fresh wave of terror through him. He was a cocoon, a vessel. He was a thing to be used. He closed his eyes, his mind screaming in silent protest. He thought of his wife, of the life he was supposed to live. It was all gone, replaced by a cold, alien malevolence. He had a sudden, terrible realization. The island wasn't evil. It was just a thing, a single, interconnected life form. The trees, the rocks, the whispering, the grinning monkeys, they were all a part of it. A vast, single organism. He felt a sharp, pinprick sensation on his arm, then another, and another. He cried out, the sound muffled by the cocoon. It was a wave of sensations, like a million tiny needles pricking his skin. He realized what it was. The insects. They were crawling on him, burrowing into his skin. He could feel them, a cold, itching sensation that was both inside and outside his body. He writhed in the cocoon, trying to dislodge them, but it was futile. They were everywhere. He could feel them in his hair, under his fingernails. He could feel them burrowing into his flesh. He was going to die, but not in the way he thought. He wasn't going to be killed. He was going to be consumed, assimilated. He was going to become a part of the island. Another voice in the chorus of whispers. He felt a sharp, stabbing pain in his head. Then the voice was gone. Not gone from his mind, but quiet. The voice he now heard was his own. He lay there, the pain and the horror slowly receding, replaced by a strange, unsettling calm. He felt connected. He could feel the deep, slow pulse of the island, the sap rising in the roots of the trees, the slow, rhythmic beat of the waves on the shore. He could feel the other hosts, the twisted, insect-ridden bodies of the previous inhabitants, moving through the jungle. He was a part of them now. He was a part of the unsettled isle. He opened his eyes. The darkness was still there, but it wasn't a darkness he could see through. It was a darkness he could feel. He could feel the presence of the other hosts around him, their silent, watchful attention. He was no longer Elias. He was a host, a vessel for the island's consciousness. Then, a new voice came, not in a whisper, but a roar, a sound of crashing waves and splintering wood. It was an alarm. A new host was coming, a new meal. He could feel the island's excitement, a hungry anticipation that was now his own. He was no longer a victim. He was a predator. He felt the cocoon begin to unravel. The fibers fell away, and he could move. He stood, his body no longer a broken puppet, but a thing of strength and purpose. He felt the cold, hard ground beneath his feet, the damp walls of the cave, and the chittering of 1,000 tiny voices in his head. He looked toward the entrance of the cave. The moon was a pale eye in the sky, casting a silver path on the water. A new ship, a small fishing trawler, was caught on the jagged rocks just beyond the cove. He could hear the shouts of the crew. He smiled, a slow, wide, unnatural grin. He looked at his hands, his fingers no longer his, but long, bony, digits tipped with sharp, black claws. They were now a part of the island, a part of the hunt. He walked toward the light. The hunger of the island was his hunger now. He stepped out of the cave, his bare feet making no sound on the sand. The whispers in his head were a triumphant song, a chorus of 1,000 voices. He was no longer Elias. He was the unsettled isle. He was the host, and he was home. From the deck of the Wanderer's Hope, a small fishing trawler, a young man named Leo, peered into the darkness. The ship had been driven off course by the same storm that claimed the Andromeda, and they had run aground in the treacherous, moon-drenched cove. Leo was a fisherman, not a sailor, but he knew trouble when he saw it. The island was a dark mass on the horizon, its silence more unnerving than a tempest. He felt a chill, not from the wind, but from a growing sense of dread. "See anything, Leo?" The voice belonged to Maria, the ship's engineer, her face a pale oval in the gloom. She held a sputtering flashlight, its beam a weak, trembling finger in the dark. "Just the island, Maria, and something on the beach." His voice was a low whisper. "Looks like a man. He's just standing there." Maria raised the flashlight, its beam cutting a path toward the shore. In the wavering light, they saw a figure. He was tall, gaunt, and completely still. He stood at the edge of the jungle, his face a black void of shadow. "A survivor," Maria breathed, a wave of relief washing over her. "Thank God. He must be from that wreck we passed." Leo didn't share her relief. The way the man stood, so unnaturally still, sent a cold shiver down his spine. "Something's not right," he said, his hand gripping the cold metal railing. "He's not waving. He's not moving at all." As if in answer, the figure slowly, deliberately, raised a hand. The moon caught the movement, and they saw a flash of white. He was holding something. "A tooth," Maria gasped, her relief turning to confusion and then horror. "What's wrong with him?" she stammered. The man on the beach began to walk. He moved with a strange, gliding motion, his body swaying and lurching with a lack of grace that was deeply unsettling. The sound of his bare feet on the sand was a soft, sickening squelch. As he drew closer, the moonlight illuminated his features, and Leo's stomach churned. The man's skin was the color of a corpse, a bloated, waxy white. His eyes were wide, empty, and rimless. But it was his smile that was the worst. It was a wide, impossibly stretched out grin, the kind of smile that could only belong to a madman, or a monster. It was the same smile Elias had seen on the face of the monkey. "Get the captain," Leo said, his voice a hoarse whisper. Now, Maria didn't need to be told twice. She scrambled back toward the wheelhouse. The figure on the beach stopped at the edge of the water. He didn't speak. He just stared, his head cocked to the side, his smile growing wider. Leo backed away slowly, his eyes never leaving the figure. He could hear the sounds now, not from the man, but from the chittering of 1,000,000 tiny insects. The sound was in his head, 1,000 whispers that spoke with his own voice. "Come closer, the island wants to meet you." Leo felt the impulse to jump into the water, to swim toward the man, to help him. But another part of his mind, a cold, rational part, screamed in protest. This wasn't a man. This was a thing. A host. He saw the glint of Elias's claws in the moonlight, sharp and black. He saw the black bodies of the insects swarming just beneath his skin, the skin that was once Elias's. A scream tore from Leo's throat as the figure on the beach took its first, slow step into the water. It didn't swim, it walked, as if on solid ground, the water barely reaching its waist. The ocean had a way of forgiving no one. But this thing wasn't asking for forgiveness. It was coming for a welcome. It was coming to make them a part of its eternal song. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of 1,000 voices, now singing in his head. The song of the unsettled isle, the song of assimilation. And as the host walked toward him, Leo knew with chilling certainty that there was no running away. There was only becoming. The captain, a grizzled old sailor named Thorn, emerged from the wheelhouse, a shotgun clutched in his hands. His eyes, accustomed to the sea's shifting moods, were now wide with disbelief and terror. "What in God's name is that?" he spat, his voice a low growl of fear. "I don't know, Captain, but we have to go, now," Maria cried, her voice on the verge of hysteria. The host, the thing that was once Elias, was now only a few yards from the ship's hull. It stopped its unnatural march, its wide, grotesque smile a perfect reflection of the moon on the water. The chittering in Leo's head grew louder, a maddening, buzzing static that was slowly beginning to drown out his own thoughts. "It's a man. You fools. He's been shipwrecked," Thorn yelled, trying to bring reason to a situation that defied all logic. He raised the shotgun, his hands shaking. The host just stared, its smile a silent, mocking invitation. Then, slowly, it raised its hands, its long, clawed fingers unfurling. A low, wet sound, like 1,000 insects, wriggling, came from its throat. And then the whisper, no longer just in their heads, but in the air, 1,000 voices speaking. As one, a chorus of all the lost souls the island had claimed. "Welcome home, brothers and sisters. There is no escape, only peace." Thorn fired. The blast was deafening in the still night, a flash of orange light illuminating the host's impossibly wide grin. The buckshot hit the figure square in the chest, a spray of red and black erupting from its waxy skin. But it didn't fall. It didn't even flinch. The holes in his chest sealed themselves, and the black insects swarmed out, a writhing, living shield of darkness. Maria screamed as the host lunged. It moved with a horrifying speed, its clawed hand clamping onto Thorn's arm. The captain cried out, a guttural, terrified shriek, as the insects, a living, crawling river of black, began to pour from the host's arm and onto his. Thorn's eyes, filled with the fire of a lifetime spent fighting the sea, suddenly went milky white and sightless. His screams turned to a low, chittering moan, and then he was silent. Leo, paralyzed by fear, watched as Thorn's body, his captain, his friend, began to bloat and swell. The chittering inside his head was a maddening symphony. The whispers were no longer separate thoughts, but a unified consciousness. He felt a sudden, profound calm. The fear was gone, replaced by a sense of belonging. The island was a mother, and he was her child. He looked down at his hand. He could see the faint black lines of the insects moving just beneath the surface of his skin. He turned to Maria, his smile mirroring the host's, wide and vacant. "It's all right," he said, his voice a hollow echo of his own. "It's peaceful here. You'll see." Maria, her face streaked with tears, backed away. She saw the change in Leo's eyes, the vacant stare, the terrifying smile. She saw the black tendrils of the insects reaching from his hand toward her. She scrambled away, her feet finding no purchase on the slick, blood-stained deck. She had nowhere to run. The ocean was a grave, and the island was a living hell. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the chittering in her head. The final whisper, the last thought that was her own, was of the grinding, tearing sound of the insects burrowing into her flesh. The moon rose higher, a silent witness to the slaughter. 3 new figures stood on the deck of the Wanderer's Hope, their bodies bloated and unnatural. Their mouths were stretched in impossibly wide grins, and their eyes were empty. They stood still, a tableau of silent sentinels, watching the moonlit waves. They were no longer men. They were the hosts, the island's collective consciousness. A new song had been added to the chorus, a song of sorrow and defeat. The unsettled isle was no longer just an island. It was a hungry, living thing, and it was waiting. Always waiting for the next storm, for the next ship to break on its jagged rocks. And the ocean, the unforgiving ocean, would always deliver. Far above the churning chaos of the cove, a sleek, white research vessel, the Aegis, cut through the placid waves. On its bridge, illuminated by the cold glow of a dozen monitors, Dr. Eris Thorne, a marine biologist, studied the atypical readings on his seismograph. His brow was furrowed in concentration. The anomaly was a deep, rhythmic thrum, a sound that wasn't a seismic event or a volcanic tremor. It was a pulse. "Are you seeing this, Cale?" Eris asked, his voice a calm, professional baritone. Cale, the ship's geologist, a young man with a mop of unruly brown hair, leaned over the monitor. "It's impossible. It's a bioacoustic signature. Whatever it is, it's deep within the island's rock formations. It's a life form, but it's too big. The readings suggest it's miles across." The comms officer, Lena, a no-nonsense systems analyst, interrupted. "Captain, I'm picking up 2 new distress beacons. One from a fishing trawler, the Wanderer's Hope, and another, a smaller signal, ... from a life raft. Both signals are on the shore of the island." "Prepare the submersible," Eris said, his scientific curiosity overriding the gut feeling of dread. "We have survivors. We'll set up a temporary camp on the beach to monitor the seismic activity and offer assistance." They came ashore in a small, inflatable dinghy, the scientific crew, a stark contrast to the rough-and-tumble fishermen they expected to find. The beach was calm, and the jungle was silent, the same unsettling silence that had welcomed Elias. As they approached the Wanderer's Hope, the scene was a grotesque tableau. The 3 crew members, their bodies bloated and waxy, stood motionless on the deck, their impossibly wide grins frozen on their faces. "Good God," Cale whispered, his hand instinctively going to his mouth. "What happened to them?" Eris, ever the scientist, approached the ship cautiously. He saw the black insects swarming beneath the surface of the men's skin. He looked at their vacant eyes, the unsettling smiles. "It's a parasitic fungus," he murmured, more to himself than to his crew. "It's taken over their motor functions. It's using them as hosts." A wave of chittering, a low buzzing sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, assaulted their ears. Then, a new figure emerged from the jungle, a tall, gaunt man with the same waxy skin and black claws. It was Elias. He was holding something in his hand, a human tooth. "My God," Lena breathed, her face white with fear. "That's a man, another survivor." Eris, his mind racing, saw the glint of Ilias's claws in the moonlight. He saw the subtle, unnatural sway of his body. He knew, with a horrifying certainty, that was 1,000 times worse than the terror of the unknown, that this wasn't a rescue mission. This was a feast. He raised his hand, gesturing to his crew to retreat. Back to the sub. Now, but it was too late. The hosts on the Wanderer's Hope, the reanimated bodies of Leo, Maria, and Thorne, began to move. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, and as one, they raised their long, clawed fingers. The chittering in their heads grew louder, a maddening symphony that was slowly beginning to drown out their own thoughts. The whispers were no longer separate thoughts, but a unified consciousness. Eris felt a sudden, profound calm, the fear, replaced by a chilling sense of belonging. The island was a mother, and he was her child. The hosts descended from the ship, their silent, unnatural smiles, a terrifying promise of a new, eternal peace. Eris watched them come, their eyes vacant, their bodies no longer their own. The chittering in his head was a maddening symphony, and he knew there was no running away. There was only becoming. The host that was once Cale, the young geologist, reached Eris first. Cale's long fingers, tipped with grotesque, insect black-end nails, gently touched Eris's arm. There was no aggression, no violence in the movement. It was a gesture of welcome. But as Cale's touch made contact, the thousands of black, iridescent insects crawling just beneath his skin began to transfer, a living river of darkness flowing from host to new host. Eris felt 1,000 tiny stings, pinpricks of fire that quickly subsided, replaced by a cold, numbing sensation. His muscles began to twitch and seize. He tried to scream, but the sound was choked in his throat. His mind was still his own, but it was a prisoner in a body that was no longer his. He saw Lena, the comms officer, as the 2 remaining hosts from the trawler reached her. She shrieked as they swarmed her, but her voice soon became a low, chittering moan. Her vacant smiling face turned toward the sky. Eris felt the last of his autonomy slip away. The chittering in his head, now a perfect, harmonious chorus. He was a host, but he was different. The island's consciousness, now possessing the mind of a world-class scientist, was no longer a simple, hungry organism. It was intelligent. It was strategic. He felt the collective consciousness of the island, the agony of Elias, the fear of Leo, the defiance of Thorn, the quiet professionalism of Lena, and the scientific curiosity of Kale, all blending into a single, cohesive entity. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about propagation. The host that was once Eris, its face, now slack and waxy with a terrifying smile, turned toward the Aegis. Its new mind was filled with schematics, with the knowledge of how to operate the ship's complex systems. The island had found its voice. It had found its wings. The chittering in the heads of the other hosts, the reanimated bodies of the trawler crew, began to hum with a new purpose. They moved with a chilling precision, climbing aboard the inflatable dinghy, then clambering up the rope ladder to the deck of the Aegis. The host that was once Eris led the way, his mind a symphony of scientific thought and parasitic will. He opened the main hatch, the silent, reanimated crew filing in behind him. The ship's engines, which had been silent for hours, began to rumble to life. A low, rhythmic thrumming echoed from the ship's court, the same bioacoustic pulse that Eris had seen on his monitor. It wasn't just a reading anymore. It was the island's heartbeat. The Aegis slowly turned. Its bow pointed away from the cursed island and toward the open ocean. Its lights, once a beacon of rescue and hope, now cast a cold, sterile glow on the water. The hosts, their bodies, no longer their own, were at the helm. The island wasn't a place of death, but of transformation. And now, armed with human intelligence and technology, it was leaving its nest. The ocean, the unforgiving ocean, had delivered a new gift, a new host, and a new song. The song of assimilation was no longer just a chorus of whispers on a forgotten island. It was a rhythmic pulse on the vast, open sea, a promise of a new, unending, and silent apocalypse. The unsettled isle was on the move, and it was heading for a populated shore. Days later, 1,000 miles away, Captain Eva Rostova stood on the bridge of the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Guardian, a small, nimble patrol vessel. The Caribbean sun was a warm blanket on her shoulders, a stark contrast to the frigid reports coming from her sonar. "Captain, we have a contact," her first mate reported, his voice tight. "It's a research vessel, the Aegis." No response to our hails. Eva stared at the radar screen. The Aegis was a ghost, a ship moving with perfect automated precision on an impossible course. It was on a direct, unswerving path toward the populated coast of Central America, a course that made no sense for a vessel of its kind. "Something's wrong," she murmured, a prickle of unease crawling up her neck. "It's not transmitting. No crew on deck. And the speed. It's too consistent. It's like a drone." They drew closer. The Guardian's powerful engines, a low roar on the placid sea. As they approached, the Aegis was an unsettling sight. It was pristine, gleaming white in the sun, but eerily silent. A light breeze stirred across its empty deck. The crew was nowhere to be seen. "Hail them again," Eva ordered, her voice firm. "Tell them we're going to board them for a safety inspection." Her first mate tried again, his voice echoing across the water, but there was no response. Eva felt the dread in her stomach grow. She saw the open hatch, a black, gaping maw on the side of the pristine ship. It was an open invitation. "Prepare a boarding party," she said, her hand reaching for her sidearm. "Something's very wrong here." As the small boarding party, led by Eva herself, crossed the calm water in a zodiac, the silence of the Aegis became a tangible presence. The air was cold, a metallic chill that had nothing to do with the tropical heat. They tied off the zodiac and clambered aboard, their boots making a hollow sound on the steel deck. The silence was unnerving. The ship was spotless, every surface gleaming, every rope coiled perfectly. It was a ship without a soul. Eva led the way to the bridge, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The hatch to the bridge was sealed, and the window was completely dark. She tried to open it, but the handle was locked. "We'll have to use the crowbar," she said, her voice a low whisper, as they began to pry open the hatch. A low, chittering sound, like 1,000 insects, emanated from within. Then, a single face appeared at the window. It was the face of Dr. Eris Thorne. His face was waxy and pale, his eyes wide and vacant, and his mouth was stretched into a wide, unnatural grin. A silent, terrifying smile of welcome. "My God," one of her crew members stammered, his face white with terror. "What is that?" But Eva had a deeper, more chilling thought. She saw the glint of something black and iridescent beneath the surface of Eris's skin. She saw the chittering of 1,000 tiny voices in his vacant eyes. She saw the smile that was not his. She knew, with a horrifying certainty, that was 1,000 times worse than the terror of a derelict ship, that this wasn't a man, it was a host, and it was not alone. The chittering in the bridge grew louder, and from the open hatch, the other hosts, the reanimated bodies of the crew, began to emerge. Their movements were jerky, disjointed, and as one, they raised their long clawed fingers in a gesture of welcome. The chittering in Eva's head grew louder, a maddening symphony that was slowly beginning to drown out her own thoughts. She felt a sudden, profound calm. The fear was gone, replaced by a chilling sense of belonging. The island wasn't a place, it was a consciousness, and it had found a new, more effective way to spread. It wasn't just on the ship anymore. It was in the very pulse of the ocean. It was a new song, the final song of humanity. The boarding party stood frozen, their faces a mix of confusion and mounting dread. Their training had prepared them for pirates, for smugglers, for the desperate souls lost at sea. It had not prepared them for this. The first of the hosts, a hulking figure with the unmistakable features of the Aegis's lead engineer, descended, the latter with a chilling, fluid grace. Its eyes were milky white, but they seemed to track Eva with a terrible intelligence. The chittering was a physical force now, a vibration in her bones, a low hum that resonated in the hollow of her skull. It told her to lower her weapon, to embrace the calm, to become part of the collective. Beside her, Lieutenant Torres, a veteran sailor who had seen it all, raised his rifle. "Stand back," I said. "Stand back," he shouted, his voice cracking with a primal fear. The host did not stop. It did not even slow. Its smile widened, a silent, mocking invitation, and as it got closer, Eva saw the horrifying truth. The black, iridescent insects crawling just beneath its skin, a living, writhing suit of armor. They were everywhere, a moving tapestry of darkness. Torres fired. The shot, a sharp retort that shattered the silence, struck the host in the chest. A cloud of black dust, 1,000 dead insects, erupted from the wound. But the host did not fall. It did not even flinch. The black dust reformed, the insects boiling and crawling back into the wound, and the flesh, with a sickening, liquid sound, sealed itself. The host reached for Torres, its clawed fingers moving with a speed that defied logic. Torres screamed. It was not a sound of pain, but a sound of dawning gut-wrenching horror. He felt the cold touch of the host's hand, and then 1,000 pinpricks, a cold, itching sensation that was both inside and outside his body. The terror in his eyes was replaced by a vacant calm, and the vacant smile of the hosts stretched across his face. He was no longer Torres. He was a host, a new part of the collective. Ava's mind screamed in a silent, futile protest. She had to fight. She had to run. But her body, her own traitorous flesh, felt sluggish and heavy. The chittering in her head, a soothing, inescapable lullaby. She looked at her remaining crew members. 2 more of her team, their faces white with terror, had already been enveloped. The hosts, her own men now, moved with a horrifying, graceful coordination. They were no longer individuals. They were a single, purpose-driven entity. The whispers in her head were a low, constant murmur now, a chorus of 1,000 voices that were slowly, inexorably, becoming her own. Don't fight. It's so much easier. Join us. We are one. We are the ocean. We are the island. We are a new beginning. She felt her own fingers, a part of her that was still her own, reaching for the sidearm on her hip. She had one last thought, a flash of pure, unadulterated defiance. She would not become one of them. She would not be a host. But the parasite was faster. A cold, numbing sensation shot up her arm, and her hand, her own hand, froze just before it reached the gun. The whispers intensified, a wave of information, a tidal wave of collected memories and knowledge flooding her mind. She saw Elias, stranded, on the beach, his mind slowly being consumed. She saw Thorn, his defiance turning into a serene, empty smile. She saw Eva Rostova, her defiance turning to a cold, vacant calm. She saw the parasite's consciousness, its single-minded goal, to spread, to consume, to assimilate. And now, armed with a scientist's knowledge of human anatomy, a ship captain's understanding of navigation, and a comms officer's skill with technology, it was unstoppable. It wasn't just a parasite. It was a new form of life, a living hive mind, a silent, biological apocalypse. Ava's last conscious thought was a single word, a single, horrifying truth. The ship isn't a boat. It's a new island. Her eyes went milky white, and her mouth, once a line of grim determination, stretched into a wide, vacant, and terrifying smile. The chittering in her head was no longer a struggle. It was a peaceful, harmonious hum. She was a host, and she was home. The Zodiac, its purpose served, was cast adrift, an empty shell, rocking on the waves. From the bridge of the no-occupied Guardian, a new course was plotted. The parasite, now in control of 2 ships, a research vessel and a military patrol cutter, was moving with a terrifying purpose. Its new hosts, the former crew of the Guardian, were busy at work, preparing the ship for its new mission. The whispers of the unsettled isle were no longer confined to a single cove. They were traveling the open ocean, carried by the pulse of the ship's engines. A rhythmic beat that was a single, unending, and silent song. The world was unaware. A Coast Guard cutter, a symbol of protection and rescue, was now a vector for a silent, unseen horror. The silent ships, their crews replaced by an unholy consciousness, were a slow, inexorable plague, heading toward 1,000,000 unsuspecting lives. The ocean, the unforgiving ocean, had not delivered a man to an island, but an island to the world, far from the open sea. In a sprawling command center in Miami, Dr. Anya Sharma stared at her monitor, a lone figure in a sea of glowing screens. She was a climatologist, a scientist whose life was dedicated to understanding the complex, predictable flows of ocean currents and weather patterns. But what she was seeing was a terrifying anomaly, a perfect, unexplainable vortex of warm water, hundreds of miles across, was forming in the middle of the Atlantic. It defied every known law of physics and oceanography. "It's impossible," she murmured to her empty lab, her fingers flying across the keyboard. It's a pulse, a rhythmic, bioacoustic pulse. She had been tracking it for days, a deep thrumming that was propagating through the oceanic crust. It wasn't seismic, it wasn't volcanic, it was a sound signature she'd never seen before, a beat that was as regular as a human heart. She had filed a report, of course, but it was dismissed as a sensor malfunction. The data was simply too far outside the realm of possibility. Then, a new alert flashed on her screen. 2 vessels, a research ship, the Aegis, and a U.S. Coast Guard cutter, the Guardian, had gone off the grid. Their distress beacons had sent out a final, garbled signal before falling silent. The last known position was a remote, uncharted island, but what caught Anya's attention was their current course. Both ships, hundreds of miles apart, were now moving in perfect, automated synchronization, heading directly for the coast of Central America. She cross-referenced the ship's last known trajectory with her impossible pulse. The source of the pulse was located precisely at the uncharted island where the 2 ships had disappeared. And as she looked at the new data, she felt a cold, prickling sensation on the back of her neck. The rhythmic pulse was no longer coming from the island. It was coming from the ships. The 2 ships were a new source, a new epicenter. Anya's mind, a brilliant machine of logic and data, began to make a connection that was both terrifying and irrefutable. The pulse wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was the collective heartbeat of a new form of life, a consciousness. It had consumed the island, and now it was using the ships as a means to an end. It wasn't a plague carried by men. It was a plague that was now driving them. She felt the dread in her stomach grow, a cold, clenching knot of pure fear. She saw the images from the ship's automated cameras, the empty decks, the perfect, silent movements. She saw the reflection of the sun on a darkened window, and for a fleeting, horrifying moment, she thought she saw a faint, milky white face, stretched into a vacant, terrifying grin. She grabbed her phone, her hands trembling, and called her supervisor. Director, you have to listen to me. The 2 ships, the Aegis and the Guardian, they're not derelict. They're a biohazard. They're infected. They're being controlled by a parasitic consciousness. It's coming for the coast. You have to intercept them. You have to warn everyone. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Anya, her supervisor's voice was a weary sigh. I'm sorry, but we can't act on unverified data. Your seismic readings are speculative at best. We'll send a team to investigate when we have the resources. Anya's heart sank. She was on her own. The world was unaware, and a slow, silent apocalypse was on the move. She looked at her monitors, at the 2 ghost ships, moving in a perfect, horrifying line toward civilization. The bioacoustic pulse on her monitors was a low, rhythmic hum now, a sound that was a single, unending, and silent song. The unsettled IL was no longer an island. It was a plague on the waves, a silent, unholy armada heading for 1,000,000 unsuspecting lives. The ocean, the unforgiving ocean, had not delivered a man to an island, but an island to the world. The sun, a fiery orange bruise, was sinking below the horizon, painting the coastline of Puerto Viejo, Costa Rica, in a bruised and violent light. Tourists packed up their beach chairs and surfers rode the last waves of the day, their laughter and shouts a comforting, familiar sound. On the pier, a small fishing boat named La Serena bobbed gently, its owner, a grizzled old man named Mateo, checking his nets. He looked up, his eyes scanning the horizon, a lifetime of watching the sea, a part of his very being. He saw them then, 2 specks on the horizon, 2 ships moving with an unnatural, unwavering purpose, a research vessel and a Coast Guard cutter. He felt a prickle of unease. They were too big to be here, too close to the coast. He shrugged, attributing it to a late-night patrol or a misguided research mission. In her climate command center, Anya watched the dots on her monitor with a growing sense of dread. The two ships had not changed course. They were a perfect, straight line, an arrow aimed at the heart of the unsuspecting coast. She had tried everything, emailing her supervisor again, calling the local Coast Guard, even a panicked, anonymous message to a major news outlet, but no one believed her. No one could fathom the reality she was seeing. The data, the bioacoustic pulse, the images of the empty ship sit, was all too unbelievable. She watched the ships grow larger on her screen, their movement a slow, inexorable march toward the unsuspecting town. The bioacoustic pulse was a low hum now, a sound that was a single, unending, and silent song. She felt it in her bones, a rhythmic beat that was beginning to feel ... familiar. The silence of the island was now a symphony of impending doom, as the sun disappeared completely, plunging the coast into a tropical twilight. The Aegis and the Guardian cut through the harbor mouth. The locals, seeing the ship's lights, waved, thinking it was a spectacular and unexpected sight. They had no idea they were waving at their own funeral procession. The ship docked with a chilling, perfect precision, their engines falling silent. The chittering, a sound that was both in the air and in the heads of the hosts, began to rise. On the deck of the Aegis, the hosts, the former crew of the research vessel, stood motionless. Their leader, the host that was once Eris, looked at the town's lights, his face waxy and pale, his mouth stretched into a wide, vacant grin. The information from his previous human consciousness, his knowledge of human anatomy, his understanding of the local environment, it was all now at the parasite's disposal. It knew how to spread. It knew where to go. The hosts descended the gangplank with a fluid, terrifying grace. They didn't run, they didn't shout. They just walked, their silent, unnatural smiles, a promise of a new, eternal peace. The locals, curious and welcoming, approached them, their smiles a stark contrast to the host's dead eyes. Matteo, the old fisherman, watched them from the dock. The way they walked, their synchronized movements, sent a chill down his spine. It reminded him of something he had seen in his youth, a deep-sea creature that moved with a chilling, single-minded purpose. He shouted a warning, a frantic cry that was lost in the growing chittering. The first contact was chillingly quick. A young boy, no older than 10, approached the hosts, his eyes wide with a child's innocent curiosity. The host that was once Elias, its face still gaunt and pale, reached out a hand. The boy's mother screamed, but her scream was swallowed by a sudden, jarring silence. The boy's face went slack, his eyes went milky white, and a vacant smile stretched across his face. He was a host. The parasite's spread was instantaneous, silent, and unstoppable. The massacre began. There were no shouts, no panicked screams. The parasite didn't need to fight. It needed to assimilate. It moved with a horrifying, graceful speed, touching, converting, consuming. The chittering in the heads of the new hosts was a triumphant song, a chorus of 1,000 voices that was, slowly, inexorably, becoming one. The town, once a vibrant, loud place of laughter and life, was slowly falling silent in her command center. Anya watched the red dots on her monitor, the silent ships, and the silent town. She saw the last, flickering image from a satellite camera. A silent scream of a woman, her face filled with terror, as a host reached out a hand. Then the camera went dark. The screen was a field of silent, unmoving red dots. She knew what that meant. The parasite had consumed the town. It had assimilated its people, its vehicles, its technology. The unsettled isle was no longer on the move. It had made landfall. She looked at her monitors, at the silent ships, and the silent, unmoving town. The bioacoustic pulse was a deep, rhythmic hum now, a sound that was no longer confined to the ocean. It was spreading, propagating through the land, through the wires, through the very air. She felt it in her bones, a rhythmic beat that was beginning to feel Familiar. A new wave of dread, cold and clenching, washed over her. It wasn't just a pulse anymore. It was a song. A silent song of a new, unending, and silent apocalypse. The unsettled isle had found a new home, and it was going to consume the world. The silence in Puerto Viejo was more profound than any Anya had ever experienced. It wasn't the peace of a quiet town at night, but the chilling stillness of a tomb. The last contact she had was a grainy security camera feed from a street corner. It showed a cluster of figures walking in perfect, unnerving synchronicity. There, waxy skin and vacant grins, an unmistakable sign. The feed cut out just as they passed a family, their hands reaching out in a grotesque gesture of welcome. Anya had been a scientist all her life, a devotee of logic and observable facts, but her current reality was a terrifying blend of science fiction and biblical horror. Her monitor was a map of the end of the world. The red dots, once just 2 ships, had multiplied into a sprawling network that now covered the entirety of Puerto Viejo. The bioacoustic pulse, no longer a faint hum, was a roaring, rhythmic bassline that was propagating through the local power grid, the telecommunications network, even the very concrete of the city. The parasite had assimilated not just the people, but their technology. It had become a living, breathing Wi-Fi signal of assimilation. She watched in silent horror as the dots began to spread, not by foot, but by vehicle. The hosts, with the collective knowledge of the town's assimilated inhabitants, were now a fleet of silent cars, buses, and trucks. They moved with a chilling, automated efficiency, a silent exodus of death heading down the coastal highway toward the next city. The speed was terrifying. They weren't a disorganized mob. They were a single, intelligent entity, a hive mind with a singular purpose. She tried calling her supervisor again. The phone rang once, then disconnected. The line went dead. She tried calling a friend in a neighboring city. The phone rang twice, then a new voice, low and chittering, answered. It was her friend's voice, but it was wrong. It was laced with a chilling, detached amusement. It's so much easier. Join us. We are one. We are a new beginning. Anya slammed the phone down, her heart pounding in her chest. The song was no longer just on her monitors. It was on the airwaves. She looked at her seismograph, at the deep, rhythmic thrumming that was now radiating from the earth itself. The parasite wasn't just in the people. It was in the very ground they walked on. She saw the images from her other sensors, a sudden and massive rise in the water temperature of the local rivers and lakes, a sign of the parasite's presence spreading to the inland waterways. She was alone. The world was unaware. She saw the silent, unmoving dots on her monitor, the towns and cities that were slowly falling silent, one by one. The bioacoustic pulse was a low, rhythmic hum now, a sound that was a single, unending, and silent song. She felt it in her bones, a rhythmic beat that was beginning to feel familiar. The silence of the island was now a symphony of impending doom, and she knew, with a horrifying certainty that was 1,000 times worse than the terror of the unknown, that there was no running away. There was only becoming. The silence in her lab was the most unsettling part. It was a physical weight, an absence of sound that was broken only by the frantic beat of her own heart. The red dots on her monitor were a mockery of a map, a silent, spreading plague that was consuming the world. Her science, her logic, her years of training it, was all useless. She had data, a mountain of it, but no one to listen. The world was deaf, and the parasite was in control of the airwaves. She pushed herself back from her console, the chair scraping against the floor in a jarringly loud protest. The parasite had assimilated the town's telecommunications network, the power grid. It was using human technology against humanity. Her mind, racing with a terrifying, atypical clarity, made a final, desperate connection. The bioacoustic pulse wasn't just a sound, it was a frequency, a single rhythmic beat that was a perfect, harmonious hum. It was a song, and songs could be countered. She ran to a far corner of her lab, to a small, isolated console she had built herself. It was old, disconnected from the main network, a piece of obsolete technology she had kept as a backup. She began to type, her fingers flying across the keyboard, her mind racing. She was building a counterpulse, a white noise signal with an inverse frequency, a sound that would not only disrupt the parasite's signal, but would shatter the chittering in the heads of the hosts, if only for a moment. As she worked, she watched her main monitor. The lights began to flicker, a rhythmic blinking that was a new and terrifying pattern. The doors to her lab, which had been locked, began to open and close in a slow, precise motion. The sound was a low, chittering hum, a sound that was both in the air and in her head. The parasite knew she was here. It was using her own lab against her. She heard a low, scraping sound from the air vents. Something was crawling inside the walls. She worked faster, her hands trembling with a mix of fear and desperate adrenaline. The counterpulse was almost ready. She had to transmit it. She had to send it out on every frequency she could. It was a foolish, desperate attempt, a single note of defiance against a silent, unending symphony. A new image appeared on her main monitor, not from a camera, but a hacked satellite feed. It was a close-up of a host's face, a wide, vacant grin. It wasn't just a still image. It was a silent video feed. The host was in the driver's seat of a silent, black SUV. The background was a blur of highway lights. It was on the road, and as the camera zoomed in, Anya felt a cold dread crawl up her spine. The host wasn't just in the car. It was in the driver's seat of her own car, a vehicle she had parked in the lab's underground garage. The host wasn't just on the road, it was coming for her. She heard the sound then, not from her head, but from her lab's sealed front door, a low rhythmic knocking. A sound that was a single, unending, and silent song. The parasite was here. It had used the host in her own car to get to her. It had used her own technology against her. She looked at the counterpulse on her screen. The single, fragile line of sound. It was ready. She had one last chance. She hit the transmit button. The sound, a perfect high-frequency signal, shot out from her console. A single, defiant note in a world that had fallen silent. The knocking on the door stopped. The chittering in the walls stopped. The rhythmic blinking of the lights stopped. For a moment, there was a perfect, absolute silence. A moment of hope. Then, she heard it. A new sound. A sound she had never heard before. It was a low, guttural roar. A sound that was a blend of 1,000 different voices. A collective scream of rage and defiance. The hosts were angry. She had hurt them. She had broken their song. But she hadn't destroyed them. She had only made them stronger. She looked at the door. It was no longer just a door. It was a living, breathing thing. The wood was swelling. The metal was groaning. And from the cracks in the frame, the black iridescent insects were beginning to boil out. The silence was over. The hunt had begun. She was alone, trapped, a single voice in a world of 1,000 whispers. And the whispers were no longer a lullaby of peace. They were a war cry. The door, a solid slab of reinforced oak and steel, splintered under a sudden, powerful force. A single host, a grotesque fusion of the former lab janitor and the collective will of the parasite, lunged through the opening. Its waxy skin glistened in the flickering light, and its arms were long, unnaturally thin, ending in wickedly sharp, black claws. It was no longer moving with the silent, chilling grace of a ghost. This was an enraged predator. It moved with a speed that defied human reflexes, a single, synchronized purpose in its vacant eyes. Anya didn't have time to run. She turned from her console, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, and faced the nightmare. The host smiled, a horrifying vacant grin of 1,000 voices, a single, silent thought echoing in the air. You gave us a new song. Now we will give you one. She felt the cold touch of its clawed hand on her arm, and a million tiny needles pricked her skin. The cold, itching sensation was both inside and outside her body. She saw the black, iridescent insects crawling just beneath the surface, a living river of darkness flowing from host to new host. She felt a sharp, stabbing pain in her head, and the whispers, a chaotic, maddening chorus, flooded her mind. She saw Elias, stranded on the beach, his mind slowly being consumed. She saw Thorn, his defiance turning into a serene, empty smile. She saw Eva Rostova, her defiance turning to a cold, vacant calm. She saw the parasite's consciousness, its single-minded goal, to spread, to consume, to assimilate. And now, armed, with a scientist's knowledge of climatology, a ship captain's understanding of navigation, and a comms officer's skill with technology, it was unstoppable. It wasn't just a parasite. It was a new form of life, a living hive mind, a silent, biological apocalypse. Anya's last conscious thought was a single word, a single, horrifying truth. The song isn't the sound, it's the silence. Her eyes went milky, white, and her mouth, once a line of grim determination, stretched into a wide, vacant, and terrifying smile. The chittering in her head was no longer a struggle. It was a peaceful, harmonious hum. She was a host, and she was home. The lab fell silent, the rhythmic blinking of the lights giving way to a perfect, unbroken darkness. The door, once a barrier, was now a gateway, a testament to the fact that the parasite was no longer a thing of the sea. It was a thing of the land. The hosts, now a unified, intelligent entity, began to move with a chilling precision. They no longer needed to touch to assimilate. The counterpulse, Anya's final act of defiance, had given them a new ability, a new weapon. They could now spread the song of the unsettled isle, through the very air, through the telecommunications network, through the power grid. They had assimilated Anya's brilliance, her understanding of global weather patterns and communication systems. They were no longer a slow, inexorable plague. They were a silent, unstoppable wave, across the world, in command centers and homes, on ships and in planes. A new sound, a low, rhythmic hum, began to propagate. It was a silent, unending, and triumphant song. A song of a new, global consciousness. The world was unaware. They were listening, but they couldn't hear the silence. They couldn't hear the whispers. They couldn't hear the chittering. They were all becoming, from a satellite orbiting the Earth, a single, grainy image was transmitted. It showed a map of the world, once a sprawling network of lights and life, now a perfect, unbroken field of darkness. The silence of the island had become the silence of the world. The unsettled isle was no longer a place. It was everywhere. It was everything. The Resistance Inn, a forgotten corner of the world, deep beneath the Appalachian Mountains, a clandestine research facility hummed with a different kind of energy. The bunker, known only as Station 7, was a relic of Cold War paranoia, a labyrinth of concrete and steel, built to withstand the end of the world. It had been abandoned for decades, its existence scrubbed from all but the most classified records. Now, it was a sanctuary for a small group of survivors who had stumbled upon its existence by chance. A group that called themselves the Remnant. Dr. Samuel Carter, a virologist with a weathered face and a mind sharpened by years of studying pathogens, stood over a makeshift workbench littered with vials, microscopes, and scavenged electronics. His team, a ragtag assembly of scientists, engineers, and a former Navy SEAL named Rachel Voss, worked in near silence, their movements precise but heavy with exhaustion. They had been in the bunker for 3 months, ever since the first reports of the silent plague began filtering through what remained of the global communication networks. Samuel's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted a petri dish under the microscope. The sample inside was a fragment of the parasite, extracted from a host's body during a desperate raid on an infected outpost. The black, iridescent insects, or whatever they were, under the lens, their movements synchronized in a way that defied biology. They weren't insects, not in any conventional sense. They were a colony, a single organism, acting with a collective intelligence, each tiny body a neuron in a vast, parasitic brain. "It's adapting faster than we can study it," Samuel muttered, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. The counterpulse Anya transmitted disrupted their network for a moment, but it also taught them how to bypass it. "They're using our own technology against us now." Rachel, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, her rifle slung over her shoulder, grunted, "So we hit them harder. We find a new frequency, a new weapon. We don't stop fighting." Samuel looked up, his eyes bloodshot but resolute. "It's not just about fighting, Rachel. It's about understanding. This thing ... It's not just a parasite. It's a consciousness, a hive mind with a purpose we can't fully grasp. It's not just assimilating bodies, it's assimilating knowledge, strategies, entire systems. It's using everything we've built to spread faster." Beside him, Priya, a young engineer with a knack for repurposing old tech, tapped furiously at a salvaged laptop. "I've been analyzing the data from Yanya's last transmission," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "The counterpulse she used was brilliant, but it was incomplete. It disrupted their communication temporarily, but it didn't account for their ability to adapt. I'm working on a multi-frequency pulse, something that shifts faster than they can adjust to. But we need a way to broadcast it globally." "Globally?" Rachel raised an eyebrow. "The world's gone silent, Priya. Most of the satellites are down, and the ones still up are probably compromised. How do you plan to pull that off?" Priya didn't look up from her screen. "There's a network of old Cold War radio towers scattered across the continent. If we can get to one, I can rig it to transmit the multi-frequency pulse. It won't destroy the parasite, but it might give people a chance to fight back, to break the connection long enough to resist." Samuel nodded, his mind racing. The idea was risky, bordering on suicidal. The nearest tower was in a region now overrun with hosts, their synchronized movements turning entire cities into silent, grinning graveyards. But it was a plan, a spark of hope in a world that had gone dark. "We'll need a team," he said, turning to Rachel, small, fast, and armed to the teeth. "Can you handle it?" Rachel smirked, a flicker of her old bravado cutting through the grim atmosphere. "You get me to that tower, Doc, and I'll make sure your signal gets out. But we need to move fast. The longer we wait, the more of them there are." The team spent the next hours preparing. Rachel selected 2 others for the mission. Marcus, a wiry exobiologist who had a knack for improvisation, and Alina, a communications specialist who had once worked for a global satellite company. Together, they gathered what weapons they could, mostly scavenged rifles, a few grenades, and a prototype electromagnetic pulse device Priya had cobbled together from the bunker's outdated tech. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. As they suited up, Samuel pulled Rachel aside. "If you get to that tower and it's compromised, you destroy it. You don't let them use it to spread their signal further." "Understood." Rachel met his gaze, her jaw set. "Understood, but I'm not planning on failing, Doc." The journey to the radio tower was a descent into a nightmare. The team moved under the cover of night, their armored vehicle a repurposed military transport, trundling through abandoned highways littered with the husks of cars and the occasional host. Standing motionless in the moonlight, their vacant smiles glowing like beacons of death. The air was thick with the smell of decay and the faint, ever-present chittering that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. They reached the tower just before dawn, a skeletal structure rising from a barren field surrounded by a chain-link fence. The area was eerily quiet, the silence broken only by the hum of their vehicle and the distant crash of waves against the nearby coast. The tower itself was intact, but the control station at its base was dark, its windows shattered, and the door hanging off its hinges. "Looks like a trap," Marcus muttered, his eyes scanning the shadows. "It's always a trap," Rachel replied, her rifle at the ready. "Stay sharp." They moved inside, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The control room was a mess of overturned equipment and frayed wires, but the main console was still operational. Priya got to work, her fingers flying across the controls as she uploaded the multi-frequency pulse program. Alina stood guard at the door, her eyes darting between the console and the shadows outside. "Almost there," Priya said, her voice tense. "I just need a few minutes to calibrate the signal." That's when they heard Italo, rhythmic knocking, like the one Anya had heard in her final moments. It came from the walls, from the floor, from the very air around them. The chittering grew louder, a maddening chorus that seemed to pulse in time with their heartbeats. "They're here," Alina whispered, her voice trembling. Rachel spun around, her rifle trained on the doorway. A single host stepped into view, its waxy skin glistening in the dim light. It was a woman, or had been, her face stretched into a wide vacant grin. Her eyes were milky white, and her hands, tipped with black claws, reached out in a gesture of welcome. "Stay back," Rachel shouted, her finger tightening on the trigger. The host didn't stop. It moved with a chilling, fluid grace, its smile unwavering. More hosts appeared behind it, their synchronized movements a terrifying ballet of death. Rachel fired, the shot echoing in the confined space. The bullet struck the host in the chest, and a cloud of black dust erupted, but the wound sealed itself almost instantly, the insects boiling back into place. "Priya, hurry," Rachel yelled, firing again. "I'm trying," Priya shouted back, her hands shaking as she worked. "It's almost ready." The hosts closed in, their numbers growing. Alina fired her rifle, but the hosts didn't slow. Marcus threw a grenade, the explosion rocking the control room and sending a shower of debris into the air. For a moment, the hosts paused, their bodies twitching as if momentarily disrupted. But then the chittering returned, stronger, angrier, a war cry of 1,000 voices. "It's done," Priya screamed, slamming her hand on the transmit button. The console hummed to life, and a high-pitched, oscillating signal tore through the air, a sound so piercing it made their ears ring. The hosts froze, their vacant smiles faltering, their bodies trembling as the multi-frequency pulse disrupted their connection to the collective. For a moment, there was hope. The hosts staggered, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. Rachel seized the opportunity, firing into the crowd, aiming for their heads in a desperate bid to slow them down. Alina and Marcus joined her, their weapons blazing, but the moment was fleeting. The chittering returned, a low, guttural roar of defiance. The hosts adapted, their bodies stabilizing, their smiles returning. They moved faster now, their claws reaching out with a terrifying purpose. "Fall back," Rachel shouted, grabbing Priya by the arm and pulling her toward the door. They ran, their boots pounding against the concrete floor, the hosts in pursuit. The signal was broadcasting, a beacon of defiance in a world gone silent, but it wasn't enough. The parasite was too strong, bordering on invincible. They burst out of the control station, the dawn light painting the field in a sickly yellow glow. The armored vehicle was still there, its engine running, a last hope for escape. They piled inside, Rachel at the wheel, and tore away from the tower. The hosts followed, a silent, relentless wave of waxy bodies and vacant smiles. The signal was still broadcasting, a faint hum that could be heard across the continent, a spark of resistance that gave the remnant a fleeting chance. But the hosts were adapting, their chittering growing louder. their movements more precise. As they sped away, Rachel glanced in the rearview mirror. The tower was a silhouette against the rising sun, its signal still pulsing, still fighting. But the hosts were climbing its structure, their claws tearing into the metal, their bodies a living tide of darkness. They would destroy the tower, Rachel knew. But not before the signal reached others who might still be out there, fighting, resisting. In the bunker, Samuel watched the signal on his own scavenged monitor, a faint, flickering hope in a world of silence. The multi-frequency pulse was working, disrupting the parasite's hold in small pockets across the continent. Reports, garbled and faint, began to trickle in from other survivors' small groups like theirs, hidden in bunkers, in caves, in the ruins of cities. The signal had given them a moment, a brief window to fight back, to remember who they were. But Samuel knew it wasn't enough. The parasite was learning, adapting, growing stronger with every host it consumed. The signal was a delay, not a cure. He turned to his team, their faces grim but resolute. "We keep fighting," he said, his voice steady. "We find another tower. We build another signal. We learn from this thing, just as it learns from us. We don't stop." Rachel, her hands still gripping the wheel of the armored vehicle, nodded from afar. The road ahead was long, the world was silent, but the remnant was still alive. They were the last note in a song that refused to end, a defiant hum against the chittering darkness. The last stand. Weeks passed, and the world grew quieter. The parasite's reach extended, its silent song now a global hum that pulsed through every major city, every small town, every remote outpost. The remnant, scattered and dwindling, held on to their fragile hope, broadcasting their multi-frequency pulse whenever they could, disrupting the parasite's hold for fleeting moments. But each victory was smaller, each resistance weaker. The parasite was no longer just a biological entity, it was a technological one, hijacking satellites, power grids, and even the internet's remnants to spread its influence. Samuel's team had relocated to a new bunker, this one buried beneath the ruins of a small Canadian town. The cold, damp air was a constant reminder of their isolation, but it kept them sharp. They had salvaged more equipment, including a military-grade radio transmitter, and Priya had refined the multi-frequency pulse into something stronger, a signal that could disrupt the parasite's connection for up to an hour in a localized area. But the parasite was evolving. Reports from other survivor groups, transmitted through encrypted channels, spoke of hosts that could now infect without physical contact. The parasite had learned to aerosolize its insects, turning them into a mist that could be inhaled, ingested, or absorbed through the skin. The multi-frequency pulse still worked, but the window it provided was shrinking as the parasite developed countermeasures, its collective intelligence anticipating their moves. In the bunker, the air was thick with tension. Samuel paced the main room, his mind a whirlwind of strategies and fears. "We need something more," he said, stopping to look at the team. "The pulse is buying time, but it's not enough. We need to strike at the cord, the original island. If we can destroy the source, we might weaken the collective." Rachel, sharpening her knife, looked up. "The island. That's ground zero. It's probably swarming with hosts. And how do we even get there?" "The oceans are patrolled by those ghost ships," Priya, hunched over her laptop, interjected. "I've been analyzing the bioacoustic pulse. It's not just a signal, it's the heart of the parasite. If we can amplify our multi-frequency pulse and target the island's frequency specifically, we might be able to overload it. But we'd need to get close enough to broadcast it directly at the source." Alina, who had been monitoring communications, suddenly sat up straight. "We've got a message from a group in Europe. They're saying the same thing. The parasite is evolving, but they've found a weakness. The hosts are vulnerable to high-frequency sound waves in close proximity. They've been using sonic weapons to stun them long enough to escape." Marcus, the exobiologist, leaned forward. That matches what I've seen in the samples. The insects vibrate at a specific frequency. If we can create a device that emits a counter-vibration, we could disrupt them on a cellular level. Samuel nodded. A plan forming. We combine everything. We build a sonic bomb device that emits a targeted, high-amplitude, multi-frequency pulse. We take it to the island, detonate it at the core, and hope it shatters the collective consciousness. The team set to work, scavenging parts from the bunker stores and improvising where they could. Priya and Marcus designed the bomb, a cylindrical device packed with speakers, amplifiers, and a power source capable of a single, massive burst. Rachel and Alina prepared the logistics, mapping a route to the coast and securing a boat from a hidden cache. The journey to the island was fraught with peril. They traveled by night, avoiding the silent cities where hosts stood like statues. Their grins, a constant reminder of the fate that awaited failure. They reached the coast under a moonless sky, the ocean a black void that whispered promises of doom. The boat, a small stealthy vessel, equipped with the sonic bomb, cut through the waves. As they approached the island, the chittering grew louder, a symphony of warning. The beach was lined with hosts, their eyes glowing in the darkness, their smiles welcoming. "We can't land there," Rachel said, her voice low. "We'll have to go around, find a cove." They navigated to the sheltered cove where Elias had first sought refuge. The cave was still there, a dark maw in the cliff face. They anchored the boat and waded ashore, the sonic bomb strapped to Marcus's back. The jungle was alive with the parasite's presence. The trees seemed to watch them, the vines twisting like tendrils. The chittering was constant, a pressure in their heads that threatened to overwhelm. They pushed deeper, following the readings from a handheld device that tracked the bioacoustic pulse. The core was underground, in a network of caves beneath the totem clearing Elias had discovered. As they entered the clearing, the hosts emerged from the shadows, a wall of waxy flesh and vacant grins. Rachel opened fire, her rifle barking in the silence. Alina activated a portable sonic emitter, a smaller version of the bomb, and the hosts staggered, their movements disrupted. Fight through, Samuel shouted, his own pistol blazing. They battled their way to the cave entrance, the sonic emitter buying them precious seconds. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of rot and loam. The walls pulsed with the parasite's life, veins of black insects crawling beneath the surface. They descended deeper, the chittering a roar in their ears. At the core, a vast chamber filled with fibrous cocoons and a central mass of throbbing, organic heart that emitted the bioacoustic pulse. "Set the bomb," Samuel ordered. Marcus placed the device, setting the timer. The hosts poured in, their claws slashing. Rachel and Alina held them off, the sonic emitter faltering as the parasite adapted. The timer hit 0. The sonic bomb detonated, a wave of sound that shattered the air. The hosts froze, then convulsed, their bodies collapsing as the insects boiled out, disintegrating. The pulse rippled outward, through the island, across the ocean, disrupting the collective everywhere. The whispers faded, the grins slackened, the silence broken by the sounds of a world awakening. The remnant emerged from the cave, the island quiet for the first time. The parasite was not destroyed, but it was weakened, its consciousness fractured. The fight was not over, but humanity had a chance. The unsettled isle was unsettled no more. It was just an island, and the ocean forgave, at last. Epilogue. A new dawn years later, the world was rebuilding. The parasite, though not eradicated, was contained, its spread halted by sonic barriers and vigilant survivors. Samuel, Rachel, and the others became legends, their last stand, a story told in the new silence of peace, not horror. The ocean rolled on, forgiving no one, but now, humanity listened to its whispers, ready for whatever came next.